They entered the water with purpose, some chasing dreams, others duty. But beneath the surface waited something they couldn't predict. In 6 corners of the world, powerful sharks struck fast and without mercy. These are the moments when calm turned to chaos, and survival came down to instinct, pain, and the will to live. From celebrity yacht trips gone wrong to divers surrounded in murky open water, in this video, we'll dive into 6 terrifying true stories of shark attacks that left survivors forever changed. Lev Malikov had always chased extremes. At 32, he was already a millionaire many times over. Russian-born, fluent in English, and powered by arrogance and adrenaline, he built his empire on crypto speculation, gambling with vast sums while documenting every move for an online audience that fed on spectacle. Lev wasn't just rich, he was loud about it. Supercars, private jets, and shirtless photo shoots on yachts had made him a sensation, but none of it compared to what he called his Apex series, a string of luxury dives with predators, live-streamed to his fan base. On June 1, 2025, the location was the southern coast of South Africa, near Dyer Island. The ocean was calm, the sky a pale blue. A luxury catamaran drifted gently beyond the kelp beds, its gleaming deck fitted with high-end cameras, drones, and satellite uplinks. Lev stood barefoot, lean and bronzed at the edge, with a wetsuit hanging from his waist. His crew of 4 technicians, a medic, and a diving guide hovered nearby, checking feeds and preparing safety lines. Lev adjusted his mask, took a deep breath, and dove into the blue without a cage. He'd called it pure freedom. The water wrapped around him like glass. Sunlight filtered down in ribbons, scattering across the reef shelf 30 meters below. Schools of fish darted in shimmering pulses. He glided over coral and rock for nearly 5 minutes, slow and fluid, the camera rig he wore capturing every movement. Viewers watched his heartbeat, oxygen levels, and depth in real time. Then the ocean changed. From the outer edge of the live stream, a shape appeared. First vague, then horrifyingly clear. The great white shark didn't lunge at first. It circled once, its outline immense, a living missile of muscle and teeth. Lev turned toward it, the camera capturing the glint of its eye and its tail's slow sway. And then it hit. The shark shot up from below in a sudden blur. Its head exploded from the dark like a battering ram, jaws wide, white belly flashing. It slammed into Lev's side with brutal force. Viewers saw the moment of contact, his body bent in the middle, the mask torn from his face, bubbles erupting like a storm cloud. The shark's jaws clamped onto his torso, teeth driving through muscle, cracking ribs. His body convulsed as blood billowed into the water, turning blue to crimson. The live stream froze. On the boat, alarms sounded. One of the technicians screamed for the emergency hoist. The medic was already at the stern, pulling in the guide rope. For seconds, no one could see him. Then Lev surfaced, half-conscious, dragged by the dive guide. His upper body was slick with blood, one arm limp, his wetsuit shredded across his left side. The bite was enormous, deep punctures along his ribs and back, flesh mangled, bone visible. The crew hauled him aboard. Blood soaked the deck immediately, pooling beneath him. His breathing was ragged, wet, and shallow. The medic pressed gauze into the wounds and injected him with a stabilizer. The shark was gone, vanishing into the deep as quickly as it had come, leaving nothing but carnage. The catamaran bolted back toward shore, engines howling while the crew radioed for a medevac. The broadcast cut to black. Fans had watched a man nearly die on screen, the horror replayed in clips, re-uploads, and screen recordings despite attempts to scrub it from platforms. What had been billed as another thrill turned into a bloody cautionary tale. Lev lost consciousness on the ride back. His pulse faded twice before the helicopter reached the hospital in Cape Town. Emergency surgeons worked for hours to close the wounds, stabilize his ribs, and repair internal bleeding. He suffered multiple fractures, deep lacerations, and nerve damage. Days passed before he was able to speak again. The media storm was instant and ferocious. Photos of his bloodied stretcher flooded social media. Rumors swirled. Some accused the stunt of being fake. Others said it was deserved, a rich man tempting fate for clicks. But most were simply shocked. Lev Malikov had flirted with death in public, and this time, death had nearly taken the lead. In recovery, Lev's body bore the aftermath. Thick scars ran from his back to his stomach. His left side remained numb, nerve damage leaving him unable to move his arm for weeks. His muscles wasted quickly. Fans who had once worshipped his daring now saw something else: fragility. He stopped posting. The live stream channel went dark. Interviews were declined. A few weeks later, a statement from his team appeared online saying that Lev was grateful to be alive and wanted to remind people that the ocean is not a playground. He gave up on freediving. Privately, those close to him said the experience had changed everything. He barely slept. The pain was constant. The sound of waves triggered tremors in his hands. When a crew member visited to deliver equipment from the boat, Lev refused to touch the bag containing his dive mask. But what haunted him most wasn't the bite or the blood. It was the moment right before. The eye, cold and unreadable. No curiosity, no hesitation. Just nature, hungry and indifferent. All the world's wealth, fame, and bravado meant nothing in that moment. He was just meat in the water. By July, Lev made one final post, a still photo of the scar stretching across his side. The caption read only, "Never again." The shark was never found. Experts said it was likely a subadult great white, nearly 4 meters long. The attack was described as investigatory, common when sharks encounter humans, but it almost killed him anyway. To most, Lev had become a warning, a symbol of what happens when ego meets the wild. The Apex series ended. There were no more stunts, no more luxury dives. By late August, he walked again, stiff and slower. The healing was far from over, but he was alive, barely. His fans moved on to newer spectacles, but the ocean remembered, and so did he. Petty Officer Julian Reyes had always trusted structure. At 28, the former California lifeguard turned elite U.S. Navy diver prided himself on composure under pressure. Dive training wasn't just a routine, it was discipline made physical. Off the coast of Guam, in waters known for their clarity and depth, the dive team's exercises were usually predictable, even serene. The ocean here felt controlled, like a simulation. But one June morning in 2015, control was shattered. That morning, 9 Naval Special Warfare Group 10 divers dropped into the Pacific during a mid-depth navigation drill. Visibility was exceptional, almost crystalline, revealing the dark seafloor below like a distant shadow. The sun angled down through the water in shimmering sheets. The team descended smoothly, staying tight in formation 20 feet apart. Reyes held the right flank, scanning with methodical sweeps. The mission profile was routine: slow descent to 80 feet, lateral navigation at 60, ascent in pairs. The sea was calm, unbothered. At 40 feet, fish darted past in flickers. At 50, schools hovered between coral heads and scattered sand. But at 60 feet, everything stopped. It was immediate: no fish, no shadows, not even the soft flick of a tail in the distance. Reyes felt it before he registered it. An unnatural stillness. The water felt heavier, as if the current held its breath. A chill settled in his spine, and his heartbeat quickened. He glanced left and right. His teammates were steady, still moving, still unaware. Then the void moved. From the deep blue, a shape came forward. It wasn't fast at first, just a presence. Massive and smooth, parting the water in silence. Out of nothing, the great white materialized like a ghost. Pale belly shimmering, black eyes locked ahead. It swam upward at an angle from the right flank, directly toward him. Reyes had no time to react. The shark struck from below and behind. Its snout slammed into his lower body with crushing momentum. Its jaws clamped down on his shoulder rig and upper back, driving serrated teeth through the reinforced straps and flesh beneath. Pain exploded across his body. Ribs cracked instantly. His regulator was torn halfway from his mouth. The force spun him sideways. He didn't scream, he couldn't. The great white thrashed once, dragging him downward in a sharp arc. Something in his gear must have disturbed it. Metal edges, synthetic taste, or resistance. Whatever it was, the shark released him almost as fast as it had grabbed him. It veered off, twisting powerfully into the depths, a trail of red blooming in its wake. Reyes hovered in shock, still conscious, arms limp, vision blurred. Blood poured from his back and shoulder, darkening his wetsuit. Pain pulsed in waves, matched only by the crushing awareness that the shark could return. He managed to raise one hand and signal distress. His body wavered in the current. From above, his teammates saw the motion as jerky and wrong. Then they saw the cloud. Everything changed. The unit shifted instantly, formation breaking as they rushed toward him. 2 divers reached his side within seconds. One stabilized his regulator and dragged him upward, while the others formed a defensive circle. They activated acoustic deterrents from their belts. Metallic pings that echoed sharply through the water, aimed at disorienting apex predators. The ascent was rapid but controlled, every second counting. Each man kept eyes on the deep, scanning the dark beneath them for any sign of return. Nothing moved below, but the fear was thick, pure, heavy dread that pressed against their chests harder than the water. At 30 feet, bubbles streamed wildly. At 10, the surface broke in an eruption of noise and light. The rescue boat had already maneuvered into position, alerted by their surface team. Reyes was hauled onto the deck in a practiced sweep. He gasped as the air hit him, coughing seawater, blood pouring from beneath his gear. The sight stunned even the seasoned medics. His wetsuit was split from shoulder to ribs, the impact area a mass of deep punctures and shredded flesh. Bone was visible along his scapula. His breathing was shallow, labored, and wheezing through the pain. One eye fluttered open, the other swollen shut. He muttered nothing, just moaned softly as pressure was applied to stop the bleeding. The medic radioed ahead. A helicopter was inbound. The rest of the team surfaced one by one, climbing aboard in tense silence. No one said a word as the boat cut hard for the coast. By the time they reached the airlift point, Reyes was unconscious. He survived the flight but remained in critical care for several days. Broken ribs, torn ligaments, massive blood loss, and 2 surgeries later he was stabilized. He'd likely never dive in active service again. For the rest of the unit, the shock lingered longer than the wound. In debriefs, they all repeated the same phrase. No warning. The shark had moved through crystal clear water without a ripple. No surface activity. No noise. Just sudden violence. Naval analysts suggested the shark had been hunting, perhaps mistaking the divers for seals or intruders in its territory. But the truth settled heavier. They had all been trained to believe that vigilance and technology could protect them, that drills were safe, and that danger came with signs. But the ocean didn't care about protocols. What haunted the team most was how fast it had happened. 1 second, Reyes was fine. The next, he was bleeding out in open water, bones crushed, muscles torn. It would have taken his spine if the shark had clamped down 2 inches lower. Another few seconds, and he would have drowned. Even weeks later, back on base, the silence stayed with them. No one joked about sharks anymore. No one swam for fun. The water they trained in daily had become something else, hostile, unpredictable, indifferent. Reyes recovered slowly. His right arm remained weak, and the scars across his back were jagged and deep. He refused to watch the footage from the helmet cams. The image of the white shark, ghosting from the blue with mouth open, lived already in his memory, vivid and close. He was lucky. Everyone said it. But luck was all that saved him, not planning, not gear, just a chance. And in the deep blue, chance was the only thing that mattered. Mbala Komba had grown up with the river in his blood, raised in a village where the Congo's moods governed life, where every season carried its risks and rhythms, and where his eventual role as a river ranger came not from ambition, but from a deep personal connection to the winding waterways that cradled his people's lives. At 42, he was respected for his sharp instincts and calm authority. This quiet man walked the muddy trails with the assurance of someone who had seen the forest and the water in every light, who knew which calls came from crocodiles and which came from something stranger, and who never feared what he understood. It was late May, during the flood season, when the river began to rise beyond its familiar banks and swallowed the lower paths in a muddy surge that pushed farther into the forest with every rainfall. That morning, under a flat sky and oppressive humidity, Mbala moved slowly along the swollen river's edge, checking the fish traps locals had laid between exposed roots and debris-filled eddies. His partner Juma, a younger ranger with less experience but deep admiration for Mbala's knowledge, was behind him, collecting gear from their dugout canoe and securing supplies they'd tied down before wading into the flooded banks. The water was chest-deep in places, dark with stirred silt, moving lazily but concealing branches, garbage, and though they didn't know it yet, something much worse. Mbala reached for a trap tied to a half-submerged log, his footing careful, his toes searching for something solid below the swirling surface. A few meters behind, Juma called out about the current picking up farther upstream, his voice casual and unconcerned. Just another day in the field. Then, without warning, the water beside Mbala exploded. From the brown murk, a thick, pale flash burst upward, followed by a violent surge of spray and mud, as a massive bull shark, bigger than any Juma had ever imagined seeing this far inland, lunged with terrifying speed and slammed its powerful jaws around Mbala's lower leg, clamping down just below the knee with crushing force and jerking him sideways so hard that he collapsed into the river with a cry that was muffled instantly by water and panic. Juma froze for a second, stunned by the sheer violence, suddenness, and impossibility of a shark being here, hundreds of miles from the sea. Then he snapped into action and waded forward with desperate urgency. The distance closed slowly through the thick water and tangled roots, as Mbala thrashed and kicked, struggling to break free from the predator dragging him deeper with every second. The bull shark began to shake its head violently, a savage motion that twisted Mbala's body unnaturally, tearing muscle and tendon, shredding skin, and forcing fountains of blood to rise and dissipate into the current. Mbala reached for the log, fingers slipping, finding no grip as the beast pulled him under again and again. The water now a churning soup of bubbles, limbs, and red. Juma screamed for help, voice cracking in panic. Still, there was no one nearby. Only the dense forest and the relentless pull of the water, and he realized with horror mounting in his throat that there was nothing in his hands, no weapon, no way to fight back, only the weight of his fear and the sound of Mbala's body being battered below the surface. For several agonizing minutes, Juma could only watch, helpless and wild-eyed. As the attack continued, a brutal primal dance of life and death, the shark circling and returning again and again, pulling its prey farther from the shallows, ignoring the splashing and shouting above, focused only on the kill. Eventually, perhaps sated or disturbed by the commotion, the shark released Mbala and disappeared into the muddy channel as quickly as it had come, leaving the water trembling with motion and silence again. Mbala's body surfaced momentarily, floating belly down, limbs limp and drifting before the current carried him slowly downstream, trailing red in wide ribbons that stretched across the surface like a warning. Juma scrambled toward him, grabbing his friend by the shoulders, but the damage was too great. Mbala's calf had been reduced to ribbons, his thigh was torn open down to the bone, and though his eyes were open, there was no focus left in them. Blood loss had taken him in minutes, the river stealing his strength faster than even the shark had torn his flesh. Sobbing with shock and rage, Juma dragged the body to the nearest inlet, covering it with his jacket before running back to the village in a blur of panic and dread. His shouts brought elders and families rushing to the river's edge, and together they followed the trail downstream until they recovered what was left of Mbala. His face peaceful in death, his body mangled beyond recognition below the waist. News of the attack spread quickly, first through the village, then across the region, as word of a bull shark roaming the flooded forest reached communities that had long believed the river to be dangerous. Yes, it was, but not in this way. Not from something like this. Not a sea creature with jaws meant for seals and fish now dragging men from their homeland's heart. Experts later explained that bull sharks, unlike most marine predators, can tolerate freshwater for long periods, and during times of extreme flooding, they sometimes follow prey deep inland. But no explanation could soften what had happened. The idea that such a predator could silently invade a place considered familiar and safe tore through the collective memory of the people like a second wound, leaving behind not just fear but betrayal, a sense that even the river they knew had turned its back on them. In the following days, the villagers began pulling their boats farther ashore, keeping children away from the riverbanks, and treating the water with a new, sharp caution. What had been a lifeline now seemed unpredictable, alien, and cruel. They called the predator Ndai Yalolendo, the shadow beneath, a name whispered at dusk when the rains fell harder and the floodwaters crept higher. For Juma, the loss carved deep. He returned to duty, but never alone, without scanning the water twice before stepping near it. He kept Mbala's knife in his belt and spoke less than he used to, watching the river the way a soldier watches a field, knowing that even in silence, something can strike, and when it does, no amount of knowledge, tradition, or respect will stop it from taking what it wants. Amara Ndaur was no stranger to the ocean's moods. Raised on the western coast of Fiji and drawn from an early age to the sea's solitude, she had spent years freediving and spearfishing in remote locations, chasing the quiet thrill of gliding through warm currents, tracking reef fish in silence, and relying solely on instinct and breath. At 29, she had grown confident and skilled, accustomed to hunting alone in conditions that made others uneasy, conditions like the ones that greeted her that morning near the edge of a forgotten atoll, a place where the lagoon bled into deep channels, and the water's clarity could change within minutes. That day, the ocean had shifted from clear turquoise to a silty green haze, the sun barely cutting through the murk as clouds gathered overhead, thickening the water with floating debris and shadows. Amara had anchored her small skiff in a shallow cove. She descended slowly with her spear, adjusting to the dim light as she drifted just above the sandy bottom, moving with purpose but caution, listening to her breath echo inside her mask. watching the flicker of movement through veils of suspended sediment. She spotted a grouper resting near a patch of coral rubble, its rounded form barely visible but tempting, and kicked gently toward it. Extending her arm with practiced steadiness, she calculated the distance and lined up the shot. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Then the ocean exploded. From the dark void behind the coral, a massive form surged forward in a blur of speed and weight, the water compressing with a sickening thump as a tiger shark, easily over 12 feet long, slammed into Amara from below and latched its jaws onto her upper thigh, crushing muscle and flesh with staggering force. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, searing through her leg like fire, her spear falling from her grip as the shark's massive head twisted, shaking her body side to side like a rag doll, ripping sinew and sending clouds of blood into the surrounding water. The shock stunned her at first, the sudden violence leaving her disoriented, but instinct clawed its way to the surface through the haze of agony, and she reached for her spear, now tumbling through the water. Her fingers closed around it as the shark jerked again, pulling her downward deeper into the gloom, its eyes cold and expressionless as it gripped her leg tighter. With every ounce of strength and desperation, Amara drove the spear's tip into the shark's eye repeatedly, not thinking, only acting. Every thrust fueled by panic and a primal will to survive. The spear didn't penetrate far. It wasn't built for a predator this size, but it made the shark recoil, its body shuddering in surprise or pain. And with a final thrash, it released her and vanished into the murk, swallowed by the shadows it had emerged from. For a moment, she floated, suspended in shock, the sudden lack of pressure around her leg as jarring as the initial bite. Her lungs burning as her body screamed for air, and her mind struggled to register that she was still alive. Then the pain surged back with brutal clarity, and she kicked weakly toward the surface, the movement sending new waves of agony through her torn leg, her blood rising with her in a widening spiral. She broke the surface with a ragged gasp, the salt air sharp in her throat, and rolled onto her back, eyes searching for her skiff, which drifted just a few meters away. Gritting her teeth, she paddled with her arms, dragging her useless leg behind her, the water around her tinged with red and thick with the iron taste of blood. Every motion sent pain to her spine, but she refused to stop, knowing the tiger shark might return, drawn by the scent, or that others might already be near. Reaching the boat, she gripped the rope ladder and hauled herself up with trembling arms, collapsing onto the deck, her breathing ragged and her vision swimming. Her leg was a mess of torn flesh, puncture wounds, and exposed muscle, the bite so deep it had reached the bone, and the bleeding showed no signs of slowing. She grabbed a towel from under the seat, pressing it hard against the wounds, wrapping it as tightly as she could, her hands slick with blood and trembling uncontrollably as adrenaline began to give way to shock. The radio crackled as she reached for it with slick fingers. Her voice was weak but steady as she sent out a distress call, giving her location before collapsing again. This time she stared at the gray sky, the waves lapping against the hull, a distant hum compared to the pounding in her ears. Help arrived 20 minutes later, a nearby fishing vessel responding to the call and rushing her to the nearest medical outpost on a neighboring island, where doctors managed to stabilize her and stop the bleeding, stitching her up through hours of emergency surgery and multiple transfusions. She had lost significant tissue, and her mobility would be limited for months, perhaps permanently. Still, she was alive, and every person who heard her story knew it was a miracle. What shook Amara more than the pain or recovery was how silently the shark had appeared, how the murky water she had grown so used to navigating had hidden the approach of one of the ocean's most efficient and unpredictable hunters. Unlike great whites that often strike from below in bursts of vertical speed, tiger sharks are known for stealth and ambush, slipping through low-visibility environments like ghosts, using the gloom as camouflage until their jaws do the talking. In the following weeks, the story of her attack spread through coastal communities and spearfishing forums. It was not sensationalized but studied, a stark reminder of the risks divers take when entering waters where they cannot see what's coming. Murky water, once just an inconvenience, now felt like a veil between safety and death, and Amara's account became something more than survival. It became a warning. She would return to the water eventually, but never alone, and never again without checking visibility first. She believed the ocean hadn't betrayed her, but it had reminded her, brutally, that no matter how skilled or experienced you are never anything more than a visitor. Sometimes the host decides to show you exactly where you stand. Sarah Lindholm had spent the last decade charting reefs and restoring marine ecosystems across the globe, but the coastline of South Africa always called her back with a pull stronger than tide or current. Her father had once studied these same reefs decades earlier, before a sudden diving accident had taken his life. For Sarah, returning wasn't just about science, memory, legacy, and finishing what he had started. Piecing together the incomplete data in his notebooks and honoring the passion that had shaped their lives. That final morning of the season, with her research window closing and only a few more coral transects left to record, Sarah prepared for what was supposed to be a routine, even celebratory dive. The surface was glassy, the late summer sun casting shimmering ribbons across the ocean, and the water beneath promised excellent visibility, clear blue down to the deeper reef shelf known locally as the break. On this narrow ridge, currents shifted and marine life flourished in dazzling abundance. She double-checked her camera housing, gauges, and the compact slate where she'd marked her father's old reference points. Lucas, her longtime colleague and dive partner, was already suited up, watching her respectfully. He knew what the day meant. This was her final dive before wrapping the study. Final samples, final footage, one last data pass across the reef her father had once dreamed of preserving. They descended together, fins slicing cleanly through the surface, bubbles trailing upward in slow spirals as they dropped through light gradients. Fish darted around them in synchronized flutters, and the reef below bloomed in vibrant color. Staghorn corals, brain corals, flashes of parrotfish and surgeonfish weaving through the labyrinth. At 30 meters, they hovered near the drop-off, and Sarah began documenting coral health and sediment buildup with calm, focused efficiency. She moved slowly along the slope, framing each photo precisely, checking coral growth against her father's aging sketches, her mind flickering between memory and science. Lucas drifted nearby, scanning the reef's edge and watching their 6 o'clock. They were deep enough now that sound faded into stillness, every breath loud and rhythmic in their masks, every motion deliberate to conserve oxygen and maintain control. But then, something changed. Lucas noticed it first, not a shape yet, but a shift in how the fish behaved. The reef that had teemed with life just moments ago seemed to pause. Schools scattered without cause, vanishing into crevices, and the water, though still clear, felt suddenly vast and empty. He turned toward Sarah to signal, but it was too late. From the abyss below the reef shelf, a massive great white shark surged upward with terrifying speed and precision, a gray blur erupting from the blue like a missile. Sarah never saw it coming. 1 second, she was adjusting her position to document a coral cluster, and the next, the shark's gaping jaws clamped around her torso and lifted her clean off the reef. The force of the impact knocked her equipment loose, the camera spinning into the depths, her mask cracked and regulator lost as the shark twisted mid-water with her body locked in its grip. A cloud of blood bloomed instantly, obscuring everything in seconds. Lucas froze in horror, paralyzed by the violence and speed of the attack, unable to process what was happening as Sarah was thrashed violently before disappearing into the swirling red and blue mix of her lifeblood. He kicked upward instinctively, screaming into his comms, though he knew no voice could reach Sarah now. The shark had vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed again by the depths, leaving nothing behind but fragments, bits of gear, bubbles rising like ghosts and blood dispersing into the sea. Lucas broke the surface in a frenzy, signaling the recovery boat with frantic urgency, his voice cracking as he pulled off his mask and described what had happened. Divers were dispatched immediately, combing the area with sonar and lights, but it was futile. The shark had taken her deep, beyond where visibility held, and nothing of her body was recovered. Only her weight belt, torn fins, and the shattered housing of her camera, wedged into a crevice at the break's edge. The loss stunned her team, not just because of the brutality of the attack, but also because of its bitter irony. Sarah had spent her life studying and protecting sharks, advocating for marine preservation, and working to establish safe diving protocols in remote and fragile ecosystems. She deeply knew and respected the risks, yet the ocean had claimed her anyway, with no warning, pattern, or mercy. In the days that followed, the research station stood silent. Her notes remained open on the desk, her dive logs incomplete, her samples packed but untouched. For the rest of the team, and Lucas especially, the grief came in waves, compounded by the haunting knowledge that she had been taken while doing something so meaningful, finishing her father's work, reconnecting with the reef that had shaped her childhood. and trying to make something better for the next generation of marine scientists. The reef study was completed by her team weeks later, finished not out of duty, but out of respect for Sarah's vision, for her dedication, and for the belief that science could still matter, even when the sea showed its most brutal face. A plaque was installed near the dive site, bolted to a rock face above the break, honoring Sarah and her father. 2 lights extinguished in deep water, remembered not for how they died, but for what they tried to understand and protect. Locals and divers who heard the story spoke of the break with a new kind of reverence. It wasn't fear so much as awe, a reminder that no matter how calm the water seemed or how skilled or prepared you were, the deep would always hold something unknowable beneath. And Sarah Lindholm, in her final dive, had entered that mystery one last time. Not as a victim, but as someone who believed that knowledge was worth the risk, even when the sea didn't blink before striking. Lucy Marceau had sailed across 4 oceans by the time she turned 32, her life shaped by wind, current, and solitude. A former competitive yachtswoman turned solo adventurer, she found peace in isolation and meaning in challenge, documenting her voyages for a growing online audience who admired her grit and grace beneath endless skies. Her latest expedition, a solo crossing of the Central Pacific, was meant to be a testament to endurance and independence. But in the vast, unpredictable theater of the open sea, even the most experienced sailors can find themselves powerless. Days into the crossing, a sudden systems failure rendered her navigation and satellite communications useless, and within hours a storm pushed her far off course. As she struggled to recalibrate and regain control, a rogue wave breached her vessel and sent it keeling violently, capsizing her small lifeboat during a panicked evacuation attempt. The crash was sudden and merciless, gear scattering, hull overturning, her last emergency flare lost to the waves. Lucy managed to cling to a single flotation bag, the only thing keeping her above water as the sun bore down on her exposed skin and the ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. For hours she drifted alone, her muscles aching and her mind battling the creeping onset of dehydration and exhaustion. The sea was deceptively peaceful now, with only the occasional swell rising beneath her, lifting and lowering her body like a leaf caught in a slow breath. Her arms wrapped tightly around the floating bag, she fought to conserve energy, whispering survival rules to herself between shivering spells. Stay calm, visible, keep limbs close. Yet no amount of training could prepare her for what was about to emerge from the blue abyss beneath her. Just before dusk, she noticed them. Shadows gliding beneath the surface, fins slicing through the water with unsettling ease. Oceanic whitetips, unmistakable even in the fading light, have broad, rounded dorsal fins and a slow, circling motion. She counted 3 at first, then 4, then more. They were known for their boldness in deep water, drawn to solitary figures, their curiosity often escalating into aggression when food was scarce and opportunity presented itself. At first, they circled at a distance, curious and measured, but the gap began to close, the circles tightening, the air around Lucy thickening with tension. One of them broke formation, gliding in slowly, its pale-tipped fin slicing a lazy arc toward her as the others held back, as if watching. Lucy kept still, every muscle locked, hoping passivity would diffuse the predator's interest. But oceanic whitetips were notorious for testing boundaries, and this one wanted answers. The first bump came without warning, a deliberate, forceful nudge to her hip, pushing her sideways in the water. The second came seconds later, sharper, firmer, as if the shark were sizing her up with escalating confidence. She could feel its coarse skin against her thigh, could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears even louder than the endless lapping of waves. Then came the attack, fast, brutal, and shockingly silent. In an instant, the shark turned sharply and latched onto her thigh with jaws that crushed muscle and tore flesh in a single twist. Pain erupted through her leg in blinding waves as Lucy screamed, thrashing reflexively. The agony so immediate and so complete it felt as if time had stopped. She struck the shark's head with her elbow, her movements wild and instinctive, one blow landing hard against its eye. The impact caused the animal to recoil just enough to break its grip and veer away, circling again at a greater distance. Blood bloomed into the water like a rising storm cloud, and Lucy could feel her strength draining rapidly, warmth spilling from her body in hot pulses as she clung even tighter to the flotation bag, the only thing keeping her from slipping beneath the surface. The other sharks didn't advance. They hovered at the edge of visibility, drifting like ghosts around a dying star. But none made another move. Perhaps it was the resistance or the unexpected injury to their companion. Maybe the scent of her blood didn't outweigh the energy of a second attack. Whatever it was, Lucy found herself alive, adrift and alone once more. The sky darkened into bruised purples and silvers as night fell, stars blinking above her in cold, distant detachment. She drifted through pain, her mind floating in and out of clarity. Her jaw clenched to fight off the shock setting in. She pressed her wounded thigh against the flotation bag as best she could, trying to slow the bleeding, her body trembling uncontrollably, her fingers numb. Still, she refused to let go and surrender, even as her vision blurred and the salt stung every raw inch of skin. Minutes that felt like hours passed before salvation arrived. Following a shipping lane rarely occupied, a freighter spotted a faint glint on the water's surface. Lucy's survival blanket wrapped around her chest like a final flare. They pulled her from the sea, barely conscious, skin burned, bloodied, and wrapped in bite marks that exposed bone. She was airlifted to a hospital from a refueling station 200 miles away. Stabilized just minutes before her blood pressure dropped too low to recover. Doctors later said that she came within minutes of bleeding to death, and that the only reason she survived was because she had never lost consciousness. Not during the bite, not during the drifting, not even in the frantic final moments as she was hauled from the ocean like wreckage from a sunken life. Her injury would take months to heal. Her mind is longer. She spoke little afterward, but to those who knew her, it was clear that something in her had changed, not broken, but altered. She had faced the indifferent vastness of the Pacific, felt it turn on her with primal violence, and still lived to tell the tale. Beneath the endless sun and atop the silent water, everything had seemed so still, until it wasn't. In one swift, blood-stained moment, the sea had reminded her that no part of it, no matter how serene, was ever truly safe.